Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by InView, LawView's community for in-house legal professionals, where we dive into the heart of the legal profession to bring you unfiltered discussions with industry titans on a broad spectrum of topics.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm David Lancelot, the CLO and EVP Advocacy at LawView. And I have the pleasure to have with me today the wonderful Paula Pepin, who is the founder of both GC Collective, which is a community of general counsels, and LexGo, which is a boutique consultancy driving transformation from within in-house legal departments. Thank you so much for being with us today, Paula.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and as I think everyone can tell from the intro, Paul and I have pretty aligned interests when it comes to the transformation of the in-house legal profession. So when Paula and I met back sometime early last year, we met, I think, via LinkedIn first, because Paula says very interesting things on LinkedIn. And then we met in person at the ACC conference in San Antonio. We're very sort of aligned in how we think about things. I described it earlier as finishing each other's sentences.
I tried to just finish your sentence now, but that did not work.
Awesome. So Paula's coming to us today from beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. Paula's based up there in Canada, and I had the really excellent opportunity to partner with Paula recently in Vancouver on a GC Collective legal leadership retreat, which was just super fun and really, I think, insightful and impactful for me, and hopefully the community up there too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we had a great time. Paul and I took electric scooters with a couple other people around, what's the name of the park there in
Stanley
Vancouver?
Park. It was lovely to tour you around our beautiful city, and you brought us the sunshine too, which was amazing.
Stanley Park. Well, it was good weather for Canadians, I think it's fair to say.
Yes,
right? Good weather for Canadians. Paula had told me how wonderful it was, and then I said, it's 40 degrees. She said, oh, it's wonderful, isn't it? I'm surprised. So before we go into what you're doing now, I'd like to just turn the clock back a little bit to get some insight into your legal leadership journey and I think beyond, right? Because you have a really quite deep experience at general counseling. And now you're, consulting as well as founding this GC Collective community. So maybe you can tell us, first of all, what was it? And I always like to hear this from guests. What was it that inspired you to get into the law in the first place?
It's such a good question, because I don't think there's an answer to this. And it actually probably goes back to, I've had a bit of an unusual career journey. So I grew up in Quebec, which is the Francophone part of Canada. And we actually don't do undergrad when we go in Quebec to law school. And so I was a lawyer at 23, went into law school, not really knowing why I was going into law school, loved studying law and loved every bit of my 3 years there until I did my bar in Quebec. But I was very young and not really sure where I was going. And so the reason I say it was a bit unusual, and that's probably the path that brought me to legal leadership, is I did the big firm, I did the small firm, and I was miserable through it all. And I knew that practicing law in a firm environment was just not what I was meant to do. Through maybe a few years into practicing law, I met with a career coach, and it's interesting that I now coach, but this career coach made me really understand what were my strengths, what was motivating me. And I realized that every answer I was giving was exactly the opposite of what I was doing in a firm, collaboration, teamwork, big picture, leading. All these things were coming very strong in my personality test and in the interview, but none of that I had the opportunity to do in private practice. So long story, early in my career, I knew I wasn't made to be in private practice. And I decided to go do my MBA. I was done with law. I'm just completely leaving, and I'm going to go into do my MBA and leave law. And that's kind of how my legal leadership journey started.
Wow. So you actually left private practice to do an MBA?
I did. And I should say before there was a little step before that, which was interesting. My last file in private practice, I listed a company on the TSX, which is our exchange here in Canada. And I remember going to the closing dinner that night and saying, I really want the CEO to offer me a job. And I was going into this closing dinner thinking like it would be amazing for me to go in house. And so before doing my MBA, actually went to that closing dinner. Funny enough, halfway through taking a bite of my dinner, the CEO was like, "Did you ever think about coming in house and joining us maybe as our first in-house counsel?" And that's kind of how it got started as the in-house counsel. Did a year of that. Still was not really ticking the box for me, and that's when I went to do my MBA. And then from there, after the MBA, I think I tried to quit law 4 times and it did not work. Finished the MBA and then moved to Vancouver and was offered a job to lead a company's people department, which was amazing. It was going through hyper growth, and that's really what allowed me to go in and flex my business muscle and become more of that leader. But as I was doing this, I was still stuck with the legal side on the side. So I was dual head of people, head of legal, which is a really hard thing to do when you're, purchasing a company, doing an M&A deal on the legal side, but also thinking about the people integration of things. But long story short, that opportunity led me to also the opportunity at Hootsuite, where I was finally the general counsel of a really growing company. I managed to build a legal team, started on my own to a team of 14 when I left, grew the company to over 1,000 employees across the world. And I would say those 2 last experiences are what made me realize that my superpower is not practicing law. It's not at all. My superpower was about leading and building things from the ground up and really kind of scaling a company. And that's kind of where I started dipping into the whole legal leadership side of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a fascinating story, fascinating journey. And I think I've said this before, Paula, but I think one of the reasons that we've connected so well is I feel like we've both had a similar kind of, and I don't know, I guess, maybe we share similar values, right? But being able to build a really great team, and seeing that team, and I've told you, I've been to a Hootsuite legal team offsite, and I just had I sat down and I have to say, I felt nostalgia. I really felt very strong sort of emotional nostalgia from back when I'd sit down with my team at eBay Classifieds and just be like, this is a great team, right? Like, and that takes anyone who hasn't done that, that takes enormous effort, right? Leadership, partnership, rapport, trust, really thinking about what's going to pull and push the right levers and turn the right dials to get the team to be as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah.
And then keep going. There's no stopping, right? You're never not leading. So I think that those kind of values and that kind of experiences is what has really brought us together.
Yes, and honestly, you make my day when you say this, because this team, I handpicked a lot of them that are still there, and I still think they were the best team in the world. And actually, an interesting story, as I did my coach training, they make you reflect on one of your peak experience in life, right? So what is that moment where you have felt the most motivation, the most valued, a moment in your career that really brings joy? And in that moment that came to me was that one dinner I had with my team in a restaurant where we had the best evening. And I looked around the table and I looked at all those people I'd hired, and I just had this sense of pride and joy and happiness. And so I was just leading a legal team. It's kind of a boring job when you think about it, but the pride I had that we had built this insane team. So yes, we share a lot of values around this. And that's not something that comes naturally to lawyers, to be people leaders and to enjoy that part of leadership.
Absolutely. And it's, I think it's fair to say that, and I don't know everything about, or much even, about the Canadian legal education system or law firm practice. I do have some experience with Canadian law firms, certainly. But I don't think there's much focus on, first of all, in-house practice, and then secondly, legal leadership or any kind of leadership, right? Law school doesn't teach you how to lead or to even partner, right? It's a very competitive environment. And then private practice, also quite a competitive environment, depending on the firm that you're in. Certainly in the States, extremely competitive. And that doesn't really set you up very well to come in and be the leader of a business function as well as a team of, you know, high performing and sometimes quite high maintenance
Yes.
lawyers,
Yes.
right? Very, very intellectual, driven, A plus everything type people. So I think it's a fascinating thing to have transitioned from, you know, basically success in that arena. And I think what you and I are really interested in doing now is sort of scaling leadership, in-house legal leadership, to as many people as possible, right? Because I think we both get a really positive sort of sense of doing something positive for the world when we engage in that practice.
Absolutely. And you're so right when you say we don't learn any of this in private practice, especially not in law school. And it's so hard because when you think about this, we're thrown into these roles, and often like you'll be practicing in private practice for 10 years and then thrown into an AGC role or sometimes in a GC role when because you've had so much experience, you're a senior, you should now know how to do this. But then you're being asked to be a leader, right? And nobody's giving you that training, and everybody's expecting you, because you have all those years of experience, that you should understand what it is to be a good business leader, right? And you know, I remember my first few years as in-house counsel, I thought my value was measured by the number of risks I would flag, right? And that's just a complete different mindset that we're trained on.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure you've had the same, and probably everybody who's listening has had the same. There's this very strong sense of imposter complex
Mm-hmm.
that comes from having no role model, right? Having no book, having no community to guide you. And I think part of what's happened over the past at least 10 years now is those things are kind of falling into place as a profession that is actually very new to the world, starts to develop and starts to have sort of models for what is great. What are the things I should do when I come in house? What should I do when I become a general counsel? And I think there's a, you know, this is part of that. This podcast is part of that. How do we get the word out to as many people as possible, especially business leaders? I think
Yes.
on what great is and what they should be looking for, because they care as much about having successful teams as part of their team as anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think GCs, like the reason I started GC Collective initially was because I realized that doing a lot of work with consulting work with big, you know, global brands and GCs that are in very well established organizations, I was realizing that all of them had the same issues. All of them were quoting their low level of maturity on the on the leadership side of things. But they didn't really know where to go to get the tools to get better, right? And so it is definitely something that I'm seeing as a gap in the industry. We're given all of that training on the substantive side of things, but to learn to be a good legal leader there's this, in my opinion, a big gap where we can get some good training there.
Absolutely. So maybe we can talk about how you moved from being the general counsel of an awesome team at an awesome business that's extremely well known, right? Hootsuite, to something that's, you know, and I've been through a similar kind of transition recently, and it can be a little scary. You know, you have all this status, you have all this everything else that comes along with it, and you're sort of jumping off a cliff,
Yes.
and hoping you can fly. So maybe you can tell us about your transition there a bit.
Yeah, when I left Hootsuite, I knew I was done. Again, this was like my fifth time quitting law, but this time I was like, "This is for real." And those years, I was there for 7 years, and I like, you know, had a lot of time to reflect on what was motivating me and driving my passion. And as I said, it was nothing to do with the practice of law. And if I had to reflect back, and I did a lot of reflection work, and that's an important part of the journey, is to take that time to reflect. But I realized, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that my superpower was really leading a team, but also scaling services. And so I didn't know if I wanted to do legal operation, but I knew I could come in and help other GCs seeing the way they can do more with less. They could scale the way their business, their team supports the business. And so I realized that this was what was filling my cup. I realized that I was getting all my energy from elevating others. This is what I like to do. I like to elevate others to be the best version of themselves. And so I jumped in. I wasn't sure what I would be doing, but I launched my consulting business, and I realized that there was a lot of interest to work with me. And I would say most of the work that I now do is really on the advising and the coaching and the training side of things, where I help GCs change their mindset basically in the way they should approach, the way they lead team, they lead the business, they lead the risk. But that's kind of how I ended up doing that jump into I call it crossing into the light.
Awesome. Yeah. And I can, I relate in the way that for me, leadership is not just leadership, right? It's management, it's operations. And of course, you need to know how to run operations if you want to lead a business function, whether that's the sales function or the marketing function or the legal function, right? It's a tremendously important part of leadership. It's not all, the CEO of a major corporation is not just spending all their time thinking about the vision, right? That's just not how it works. Anybody who's worked with in a leadership team knows that. It's a ton of operations. Operations is how you win in the end, right? You've got to set your goals. You've got to be strategically aligned. And then you've got to get ops done. And you've got to make it repeatable and scalable. And I think one of the things I always say is you can't do this without that. You can't have a really integrated in-house legal function where you're invited to the offsites and you're able to spend time talking about strategy, unless you've got a way to get everything off the plate that you don't need to spend your time on. And for me, that's operations, right? Whether it's policies or processes or technology or whatever, working on that helps you with the other part, helps you be the person that can steer the ship around the iceberg before it even comes over the horizon.
And what you're saying really is interesting, because I do think one of the first questions I'll ask a GC that I before I start working with them is, how much of your time are you spending managing and leading versus doing? And I will say a lot of the GCs that are lower on their maturity journey on leadership will be doing 90% of the time, right? And one of the reason that I find is that because we were trained that the value we have is in our output. The more we produce, the more we support the business in terms of legal output, the more value we bring to the business. And that needs to change in terms of mindset to become a good legal leader. Is you actually have to get out of the weeds. You have to free up your time. You have to get the technology, the processes in place so that you free up what would be, in my opinion, a good 50% of your time, where you're spending your time mentoring, coaching, leading in strategic meetings and doing all of that. But if you're still in the weeds, you're never going to be able to do this, right? So it's changing that mindset of like, my value is actually not doing the legal work. My value is into leading the business and leading people on my team.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're probably the only profession that has been indoctrinated to think the harder you work, the better you are.
Mm-hmm.
The marketing team doesn't think if I'm here really, really late, people will respect me.
No.
Right? It's only the lawyers who you see late at night in Toronto. The lights are off and they have to wave their hand to get the lights to come back on. Mm-hmm. Right? And they're like, you can tell I'm really good at this. And it's like, mate, like your business actually doesn't want you to be there late.
No.
What they want you to be is impactful. Right? And being impactful actually takes this a bit of headspace to think about, where can I be most impactful? Mm-hmm. Where should I put our resources? So I think it's actually a lot harder for lawyers to become leaders than it is for most other professionals, because we've been so, indoctrinated.
Yes, we have. And the other thing that I love to do is also teaching lawyers to not answer emails immediately, and teaching the value of that. And it's like a deer in headlight when we talk about this, to say, no, the business can't do this. Like, I have to answer every email when they come in because it's service. I'm service oriented. This is what I need to do. This is how we measure if I'm engaged and I'm valued and I'm, a good lawyer. And that's not true. That's not true, because when you do this, you're actually not focusing on the right things, right? And sure, if your CEO emails, Absolutely. You want to answer really quickly, but it's okay to shut the inbox 3 hours a day and focus on what you should be doing in the business rather than just answering the latest emergency. And it's hard. Yes. It's hardwired in our brains.
Absolutely. And I think an author I read not that long ago, he said that legal is the only department that can define its role. That everyone else is doing marketing or sales, and pretty much everybody knows what that is. But legal can say, these are the things that we should be concerned about. We're going to focus on these things. This stuff over here, we're going to write a policy and we're not going to look at it anymore.
Yes.
And to some people, I find that can be a real game changer, right? To just stop doing stuff. And I think that's what you're talking about too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe, Paula, you could tell us sort of, what does your engagement, consulting engagement, look like when somebody comes to Lexco and says, "Hey, I've heard about your firm. I think we need some help here." How does that usually go?
Yeah, I would say there's like probably a few models we do. So I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. So a lot of GCs will come to me and say, I feel stuck in my role. I feel like I don't have a sounding board. I feel like I need someone to talk to. And I want to have executive presence. I want to learn to speak up at the executive table. I want to earn my spot at the executive table, like some recurring themes. So I'll work with GCs on really elevating them to be that executive and really helping them be seen as that executive in the team. So there's a lot of one-on-one coaching like this. I work a lot with teams as well. So, GC will come and say, my team's not acting as a team. Like they think team meetings are a waste of time. They don't want to talk to each other. They want to, heads down and be doing their work, and they don't want to talk about strategy. And so we'll come in and we'll do some work with them to really help the team come together and start moving away from being a group to being a team that's working in harmony and really trying to solve, really align around the mission and the vision of the legal department and what we're trying to accomplish. So we'll do a lot of that. And I would say kind of a subset of that, we do a lot of strategic planning with legal departments. This is where I think we bring that has the most impact, because the reality is we don't know. Again, it's another thing we don't know how to do as lawyers, is we don't know how to be strategic. When somebody tells me I need to write a strategic plan, you're like, first thing you think is I have to write a 10-page, I need to isolate myself for 2 days in an office, and I need to write a legal document, right, that will summarize my strategic plan for the next year, which is exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. So we basically take the hand of the legal team and walk them through how to become that strategic partner and how to go about like a really easy way to start with a simple strategic plan that will support the business. So we do a lot of that. But again, I think it comes from the gaps that we're trying to fill in where, our GCs just don't have that skill set. And if they do, they're really, really lucky. And I'm sure you say the same thing. This actually came from Lucy Basili, you probably know as well. But Lucy, the first time she met me, she said to me, "From one unicorn to the other unicorn, I see you." And I love that, because it's true that there's few of us, David, that like will have the ability to be both a lawyer and a leader. And so there are some of those unicorns out there, but there are some that need the help to become the unicorn.
Yes. Well, and I think it's fair to say that I did need a lot of help, and I continue to need a lot of help. And I think I will always need a lot of help. You reminded me of when I joined LawView. It wasn't that long ago, last year. And I was asked to do an SOP. And I was just like, okay, great, no problem. I'll get that sorted. SOP. What does that mean? And strategy on a page. Of course I know what that means. But I
thought it was standard operating procedure. So
No. Well, at LawView, it's strategy on a page, like a slide to condense down your strategy to some. And I just I'd spent decades doing decks of operating reviews and whatever, but I don't think I'd ever been asked like, what is your strategy, right? Mm-hmm. And to have it like really concise, succinct, and in the same form. And I quickly learned, and this is only months ago, like I need to reach out to the other members of this leadership team and align with their strategies, right? Like I can't just have my own strategy, because et cetera. Right. So there's a lot of that lawyers are just not used to doing. Right. We're just not, to become a business person with legal skills, you need to do quite a lot of business. And most of our roles early on are really not aligned with learning how to do business. Right. They're very, very substantive and academic almost.
Yes.
I think.
And this is why the community is also important, because you need to hear from others that they are also struggling with this, right? Because you're not alone in this. And We love
100%.
precedents as lawyers, and I'm such a believer in like a strategy on a page. You should start from a precedent, right? Like anything else, right? So relying on the community, the GC Collective community, to say, okay, guys, I need to come up with this thing, or I need to build my OKRs for the department. I need to do, X. They don't need to work with me to do this. They can actually probably support each other into building what can be useful. One of the things we've just launched, we're going to launch with the community, is, I had a bunch of solo GCs on a call last week, and all of them need to write a signature policy, delegation of authority, right? And I said, okay, well, this is where the power of the community comes. Get together, write it together, and then, you're all going to save time. If you're all in your office trying to do it on your own, then why not get a group of 5 of you, work on templates, delegate roles and responsibility, come back and create something together. And here they are. They're going to have this that they're going to be able to use and customize for the business, but at least they're going to have the first draft.
Awesome. Yeah, and that sounds like a super valuable way to connect with people. Maybe we should also turn back the clock a bit on that one too, because you founded Lexco, clearly very valuable. How did GC Collective come sort of into your ideation phase?
Yeah. I don't know if I've mentioned that I like to help others, but I do. And so I think I was seeing those recurring themes that were coming from GCs. And again, I'm all about supporting them, but I'm also, we're a small and mighty team, and I can't support every legal department. So I thought, why don't I create a peer group where you can support each other? And so before even launching the GC Collective, the version that exists today, I started with small roundtable of GCs, and we'd meet every month, and everybody would show up to the meeting. I was quite surprised. I'm like, oh wow, they actually like coming. And so this number went from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20. And at that point, I thought, I think we're onto something. And I think we always say we start businesses based on our own needs. I felt like I needed my community when I was a GC, and I never really found my group. But I was looking for that community for the longest time. And I went from community to community, and I didn't really find a community of GCs that really kind of filled my needs. And so I thought, why not start? And I enlisted the help of my 2 co-founders to really get this off the ground. And it started a year ago, and we've just been growing since then. And our goal there is to create that really authentic community that supports each other to become better legal executives, or business people with legal skills. I love how you say that. That's really what we're trying to make them be better at, is how can I be better with managing my time, managing change, leading a team, all of these things. So that's how GC Collective came together, and it's been amazing to lead it.
Yeah, and I've of course, as I said, had time to interact with some of the members of the community, and I thought, I think it's relatively unique, I have to say, because we talked earlier about this. I've now, in my new role, I've been to a lot of conferences, and I've participated in a lot of communities. And before there weren't really any legal communities. You might have ACC, right? That's probably the granddaddy. Although now I've learned that there are other ones that are even older, but they're much more verticalized, and most people wouldn't be involved in them unless they were in sports or education or a specific field of legal practice. But I don't think there's a community for general counsels, legal leaders who, which the community itself has sort of its avatar almost, right? Has a person who's guiding the community and I don't know how to describe it, the sort of educational framework, the framework of it, in the same way that you guys are, because there's lots of other communities, and they're sort of just like, there's content and there's speakers, and that's all great, but there's no sort of like guiding principles of this is how we're going as a profession, right? This is how the transformational journey is occurring. And I really felt that when I was with your community. It was really neat.
That's music to my ears, because that's what we're trying to do. And it's not easy, I will say, right? It's not easy. And it's, it's mostly Jen Smythe-Wiley and myself behind this. And Jen is this amazing strategy leadership expert that has that wealth of knowledge to share with the group, right? And we're lucky to have her, and she's able to do that. But yes, we're trying to really create something unique that doesn't exist. I think you said something when you came to Vancouver that you came in and you thought they were all my friends, and they're not. Like they're not people I've known for a long time, but they've been people that I've been cultivating authentic relationships with for a long time, right? And they eventually became part of my really close network. But that's the feeling we want people to have, is that when they can come into our community, they can be vulnerable. They can talk about what they're good, what they're not great at. They can really be open in their journeys. And so that makes me happy. And yes, we are really trying to build programming around this that will make them better legal leaders. And we have so much to offer. So thank you. This is a huge compliment.
Well, and I think, what you're doing is almost like you're building an outstanding legal team.
Yeah, I like it.
Right.
Maybe, yes, there you go.
You're using the same principles and talents that you had as a general counsel to build a great team at a number of companies. And you're using that at scale almost, right? Yeah. And the rapport, the trust that leads to the vulnerability, that leads to the accountability works in almost any, you could be a football coach, same skill set, just with a few extra, I would be a terrible football coach, but I'm a pretty good legal leadership coach. And I think you have a similar background and similar passion in that area. So it's a really neat journey, and I'm really glad to get to share some of it with you.
Yeah.
So Paula, I'd like to transition now to some more, I think, almost conceptual stuff. And the question I'd like to ask is, where do you think legal leadership is going? I think we have some understanding of where it's been. Clearly, you're very deeply involved in where it is now. Where do you think it's going in the future?
Well, I think legal leadership needs to evolve in the future. We know that with everything that's happening to our profession, if you do not have a level of self-awareness in terms of understanding where you are today, where you need to go as a leader to be seen as a legal executive, you're not going to be successful. And so, today, in the past, we know where we were. We had to be, if I'm thinking about the in-house legal community, but you had to be a really strong lawyer, right? With time, if you wanted to earn your seat at the table, you had to show that you were somebody that could be strategic, that could show that you were more than just a legal person. You were also a legal executive that could think about the big picture. And I like to say the way I see a legal executive, and I think is their role is to support the velocity of the business. I always say, if you're trying to earn your seat at the table, tell your CEO, I want to be at the table because I want to help you go fast. That always is a line that works with the CEO, right? And so the future of the profession, if you are a GC or in a higher legal leadership role, and you're not moving in that direction of saying, I need to be that person that's going to help you go faster, that includes AI, that includes, building the right technology, the right process so that your team can do more with less, as usual. This is where you need to go. And if you're not following that train, the train will leave the station and somebody else will come and replace you. But you do need to, I think, get on that train.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, we agree completely. I talk about moving from a reactive to a proactive stance, right? I think we've all been trained to be very much waiting for something, right? Waiting for the client to call or to send a paper fax, and then you start working and start billing hours. A business is a very, very different environment, right? There's nobody waiting for something to happen at most companies, right? We're all trying to, I'd call it accelerate the business's strategic objectives. And lawyers are extremely well placed to do that once they make that mindset shift to, I don't need to do this stuff. I can decide not to do this stuff. I can focus on this stuff. But of course, all of those things are pretty big mindset shifts from what all of us have been trained to do in the past.
Yeah. On that topic, I always think about when I help legal teams think about a strategic plan, the first obstacle I hear about strategy is I don't have time to be strategic. I have to react to everything, right? And so the first step in being proactive is to actually build that strategic plan, again, on a page, not a 100-page document, but something that's going to guide your team on understanding what are the priorities. And so that when something hits your desk and it's not a priority, you can actually say, okay, does it align to what should be important to us? No, then I should not be doing it. I love giving the story of the bees on the roof. And so we were very clear with my legal team about what should be the strategic priorities, and they were allowed to say no. They were allowed, if something was coming in that had nothing to do with where we're going, one of their major pillars, or if it's like a new initiative that we know is important, they were entitled, and I would actually coach them to say no to the business in terms of like, there's some risk you need to assume, and we're not going to be looking at this because we have to be focusing on these important things. And a member of my team, I've learned one day, had been spending 8 hours researching the liability related to having bees on the roof of the business. And because we were about to produce honey for our customers, which absolutely was not aligned with, any of the strategic pillars of the business. And so I use this example all the time to be like, no, I use this. I went to the CMO. I said, do you even know about this? And she said, absolutely not. We killed the project. You want to have bees on the roof? You're going to take the risk to have bees on the roof. We're not going to start researching the liability of that. But yes, like if you want to move away from that reactive mode, you have to start thinking about where should I be spending my time and start saying no to things.
Yeah, totally. I love that story. I'm definitely going to use that story about the bees. Beehives. We're talking about putting beehives on the roof of a corporate building.
Beehives to produce honey.
I thought I'd heard everything, Paula, but I guess I haven't, and I'm sure there's more crazy stories like that. There are great things, many great things about being an in-house lawyer, and that's one of them, right? Is that thing where someone comes and says, oops, we mistakenly agreed to buy, however many cars in wherever. And you have to go, it's taken me a few years to get to this point, but I'm not going to just go, you did what?
You did what?
Say something like, that's a really interesting thing that you've done. Let's talk about how we can ensure that doesn't cause, one of my favorites was at an unnamed business, let's say, we need to get insurance for our race car. Oh, you have a race car?
Yes.
I've been their lawyer for like probably 3 or 4 years.
You don't want to know.
I didn't know we had a race car. Yeah. And why? Oh, because the driver is concerned that he's insuring the car and he's having some risk on these crazy dirt courses up in the tundra out there. And I was a little bit surprised to be honest. But yeah, I love that part of the job. I think it's a super fun job. But I think for most people, it's this sort of overwhelming situation, especially now when there's all this messaging, probably coming from the both of us, that you should be a business person with legal skills and that you should be deeply integrated into your business and that you should be having lots of coffees, going to all the offsites, going to the product meeting, going to the marketing meeting, so that you can be involved early enough that you're not the person that answers the phone on whatever national holiday because there's another emergency that always happens on whatever holiday you celebrate. And that is a really difficult sort of challenge that very much relies on this idea that it's not just about leadership and it's not just about philosophy of support. It's also about way of working and scale and operations.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to close with a question about mentorship and materials. I have to say that in my legal leadership journey, having a mentor, having multiple mentors has been super valuable to me. I was just wondering how you found your mentorship in your journey.
Yeah, I feel like there's been quite a few mentors in my leadership journey, and all of them were outside of legal. And I think they are also people that have helped me really figure out who I was and what were my superpowers. I like to call them superpowers. I would say it first started with in my early career, my first role as in-house counsel, that famous company that hired me at the closing dinner. The CFO there one day, I remember stopped me right in the middle of his sentence and said, Paula, you have to start seeing the forest from the trees. And that's the very first time in my career I'd heard this. And it's stuck with me. And he was so invested in trying to make me understand what my role was with the company. His name was Danielle. He was an amazing CFO and very business minded. And I would say that was kind of the first seeds of me becoming a business person. And then later on, CFOs have had a huge influence. He's now a really good friend of mine, but James Rumble was CFO in the two last companies I was at. And every time we would be in the meeting room and I'd introduce myself and I would say, oh, I'm a lawyer, he would also stop me and say, she's not a lawyer. She's way more than a lawyer. And he would actually basically give, a pitch on why I was an executive and I was way more than a lawyer. And he's always said to me, like, you're underselling yourself. You need to talk about how much of an executive you are and how you can see more outside of the law and you can be that person that supports the velocity of the business. I would say these have been two mentors for me. And I would encourage anyone listening to find those mentors that will help you become that better business person. James, that person actually did something phenomenal with me, and I'm still thankful to him for it. But in my days where I was on my own as the solo person, he said to me, oh, you need to hire. And I said, oh, James, I think I can do it. This is what we're trained for. We're just I'm going to work harder. And he said, Paula, I cannot have his sales deals not close because of legal. And I promise you, and he took his laptop and he sat down with me and he said, I'm going to force you to look at revenue projections with me. And you're going to go back and you're going to build a model and you're going to tell me how many lawyers you need to be able to support that revenue growth. And that was such a pivotal moment in my career where I figured out that actually my role, I need to staff up my team if I need this business to grow. And it really helped change my mindset. So, advice to others in listening is surround yourself with those people that see you more than that cost center, see the value that you bring and how important you are in the business. And it's just so important.
That's a great story. I think that's wonderful to have somebody who is willing to give you that kind of guidance in a trusted and positive and beneficial way. Right. I mean, I've received some guidance that wasn't so trusted and positive and beneficial from business partners in the past. But I've also, and you really made me think about it, I've also had, I guess, some of my best mentors were business leaders as opposed to legal leaders. Right. They were CFOs, they were heads of HR who said to me, David, you got to take off your legal hat.
Yes.
You got to think about, how do you provide me advice as a business leader, while at the same time saying, as a private practice lawyer, I tell you this, as a business person with legal skills, taking into account all of the complexity of our business and everything that I know, there's a lot more than external counsel would know, and is the reason we're not just outsourcing everything that we do to external counsel. I would advise you to go this way, and in fact, we should go this way. And I'm not so much advising you as just telling you this is what we should do, because I'm on this leadership team too. Mm-hmm. And I can do that just like the head of marketing can say this is what the law says, because they do it all the time. Right. So why can't we?
Exactly.
And I think maybe finally, to sort of round things up, when I started practice, and I imagine when you did too, there weren't a lot of great mentors. We've talked about that. There's a lot more of them now, and including yourself and the Lexical practice and the GC collective community. And there also weren't any materials, right? Lawyers love reading and love finding something that says this is how this is the law. Do you have any materials that you would recommend to our audience if they wanted to get started on their legal leadership journey or just get deeper into it?
Yeah, there's one that's probably like off the beaten path in terms of recommendation, but I loved it. And I think it helped me be who I am as a leader. And so the name of the book is actually in front of me. It's called Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. But the reason I like this, and it's really much written from the lens of somebody building a company. But if you think about it and use it on how to build your legal department, it basically tells you everything you need. And it's based on the Rockefeller habits, if you've heard of that. But basically systemizing the growth from a people, from a system, from a cadence and execution perspective, which is really what I often think that's what I teach legal departments to do. It's like, if you put a plan on a piece of paper and you put it in the drawer, I promise you it will not get executed, right? But if you build a system to check in and to make sure that these things, that you have people assigned to it, that you have roles and responsibility, that you have a cadence that checks in, you have a dashboard that reports back to the executive, all of these key things will help you scale the department. So I love that book, Scaling Up. Really, I think adapts well to the legal department. In the same vein, I would say Atomic Habits is another of my favorites. It can be good for personal growth, but again, it can be good when you think about how to be disciplined about everything that you're building. I always quote this from his book: you do not rise to the level of your goals, but you rise to the level of your systems. So basically, if you have all the goals in the world, but you don't have a system that goes around the checking of those goals and how you're delivering against it, you're never going to get to do those goals, right? So these are two of my favorite books.
Wow. Well, I think I would have paid for that. Absolutely. That was some great knowledge there that I'm totally stealing and will be repeating in future. And Scaling Up sounds perfect for me. I need to get that in my Audible playlist immediately.
You do.
Thank you so much for that, Paula. You've really added a ton of value, as always, every time I speak to you. And I hope that everybody else listening to this podcast will have gotten that same value. And of course, if people want to reach you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, probably through the GC Collective website. They can contact me through there. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. And on LinkedIn, obviously, I'm very present on LinkedIn and happy to meet other people that are trying to grow in their leadership journey. I'm always happy to connect.
Awesome. Thank you, Paula. Much appreciate your time, and hopefully see you soon.
Yes.
And thank you everyone for listening. This has been the Legal Leadership Podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit follow and leave us a review on your listening platform of choice. We love engaging with our community and hearing from you, so please head to inview.lawview.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.